Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Shine at Work podcast. I'm your host, Karen Weeks. As a career transition coach and a culture leader, my goal is to help career-oriented humans get unstuck so they can shine brighter in business and in life. I believe that you deserve a career that lights you up because, spoiler alert, it impacts how bright you shine in your whole life. This season, we are laser focused on helping you navigate your career and find a job internally or externally, or do a full career change. Because guess what? It's not too late. You can still set yourself up for a great 2023 starting now. Because I know what it feels like when your light is dim and you're in a role that doesn't light you up anymore. I made a career change from theater to HR, and now I've added coaching to the mix. I know what it's like to try to think about how to raise my hand for a new role at my company, but not sure how to start those conversations. At times in my life, I had to take a look inside to see what was most important to me, what made me shine bright, and how to make adjustments along the way, and how my career even fit into that. It's all possible. I did it, my previous guests have done it, and I help others do it too. And I'm so thrilled to welcome my co-coach, my friend, recruiting partner, Dan Carr, to be the co-host throughout this season. You walk away from each episode not just inspired, but with some actionable advice and steps you can take to land a new job and make the most out of your career. And I hope that you find it so valuable that you subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and tell your friends, because we all deserve to shine bright in our lives and at work. So let's jump into this week's episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the Shine at Work podcast. I'm Karen Weeks, and as we now are doing more and more, we have our friend Daniel Carr here with us as well.
Hello, everyone.
Today, we're going to talk more about really kind of dissecting job descriptions. So as you're applying to roles, you're looking at all these different job descriptions. Some, let's admit, are written much better than others. And so we are going to try to help you figure out what exactly to be looking for. What do all the different words mean in the different sections? What you can start learning about a company through those job descriptions, and just kind of, as always, share the behind the scenes point of view about it. And we have written a lot of job descriptions as well. And I always coach people that job descriptions are ads, like they're advertisements for a role, not just everything, the laundry list of what you have to do. But that doesn't always come through. And I have definitely written some bad job descriptions.
As have I.
Well, I think it's so common that it's hard to get your head out of everything this role needs to do because you want to make sure someone knows what they're signing up for.
Yep, and I think it's tough to refine, everything that you want out of a person, and really strategically think about what's fair to include and what expectations you should have of someone, of what you're actually, the level of person that you're actually looking for. So it can definitely be a tough thing to put together for a team.
Well, and I think too, as one thing that I've tried to think about with different job descriptions is, especially if you're hiring for a role that on paper looks very similar no matter where you work, an engineer, an accountant, maybe a client services rep, try to frame it more around, so why here? Like, as an engineer, yes, you're going to use Python. You're going to do all the things that you could use probably anywhere. But what you're going to be building might be really cool. So sometimes, so the flip side of that is, if you're reading the job description, are they doing a good job explaining what you're actually going to be working on versus the letter of the law of what the role is?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think some of the best job descriptions really paint the picture almost of what the day-to-day will look like in reality, and give you a little bit more of a view of what you're going to be working on, what maybe the first 90 days will look like, as opposed to just a list of tools that you need to have and very general responsibilities. But again, it's can be tough to come across a good job description, and I think we'll talk a little bit about how much you should weigh if the job description doesn't have everything, and like how you should attack that.
Well, and it's interesting too, and we'll probably talk about more of this in a couple of episodes when we talk about interviewing, but you can also use that job description to ask questions. Someone
1,000%.
that we're working with right now, it applied for this role, and they were surprised that as a manager, it didn't talk a lot about team management. So as she kind of got through the process, she asked, well, what do you think is one of the key things of success in this role for the person that walks into it? And the hiring manager responded, team management.
Right.
And she was like, wait a minute. And she didn't say this out loud, but she was like, that's totally missing from your job description.
Yeah. Yep. And that's going back to writing job descriptions and how that process happens. Sometimes it can be a job description that's been kicking around in the company for the last 5 years, and they just post the same one without actually really drilling down into what might be different about this position, or maybe there's a disconnect between the recruiter and the hiring manager of what the role is. So those problems certainly can pop up. It stinks when it pops up in an interview, but to your point and what you're alluding to, we'll dissect this a little maybe further down the conversation, is using that to your advantage, and utilizing some of those questions that pop up for you, reading through the job description, and things that may look like a flag. Is that an opportunity to ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just kind of take a step backwards, because sometimes we work with folks who haven't even looked at job descriptions in a few years. They've been in their role for a while, or maybe they're thinking about changing industries, so things might look a little different. So when you sort of look at a job description, you've got sort of the about the company or about the team section. You've got responsibilities, or some people may call it like what you'll do versus your background, which is either your experience or your background, or maybe what you bring. And then sort of maybe a little tag at the bottom, which might talk about diversity and inclusion, or it might say things like, we're open to people with different kinds of backgrounds. What are some of the key elements of actual job descriptions as candidates look at them?
It's all important, depending on different stages, or you can pull different pieces out that can be important for you, and as you go through your process of applying and searching for the right company. But generally, you're going to find that about the company at the top of the job description, and that's really something to pay attention to, because it's a window into the organization. It's your first real window into how they talk about themselves, what they find important. It might give you an indication of the stage or how the company is growing, and there's a lot of little clues in there that can give you very valuable insight into just what's happening with the organization. And it can spark some questions for you if you do get an interview of what you want to talk about or what you want to ask about. But most importantly, hopefully it's starting to resonate with some of the things that you find important or have listed out as being important in your next job.
Yeah, and it also might share what is important to the company. If they're leading
Yep.
with X revenue, or Y fundraising, or cool clients that they're working with, or number of users that they have, it kind of starts to show what the company cares about as well, because that's what they're leading with. So that's what they want candidates to know first.
Yep. 1,000%. So definitely something to, it can be something that people gloss over, but there's a lot of valuable information in there to take note of.
Yeah, and the other thing too, which we were talking about earlier, is you also get a sense of the company and the language that they use. If it's really casual, or it sounds like they're trying to use like cool, relaxed, you're going to be the ninja of this, or like that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It shows probably some of the culture. If it's a little more buttoned up or a little more traditional, it might kind of show that version of a culture. Neither is right or wrong, but just gives you a sense of the tone of the kind of company.
Yep. And that's super important as you look at your strategy of applying to the position, or how you're interviewing. Like, what does the language of your cover letter look like? Like, you want to try and match that as much as possible as what you see the tone being in the actual job description. And then it can be a window into what to expect in your first interview or first phone screen too, and how to navigate that a little bit. So it's all super important. Some really key indicators can be sussed out in that about the company part.
Nice. And then sometimes they'll flow into more of like a prose around the job itself before it
Yeah.
gets into the bullets. Um, is that a signal of anything other than they're just sort of talking a little bit more about the role versus just jumping into bullets?
Yeah, I mean, I really look at this as it's kind of their thesis statement of what the position is. And for, job descriptions that can be pretty long, it can be a little overwhelming with all the different responsibilities and qualifications. This is a snapshot of like, generally, like we were saying, job descriptions can get recycled, but that about the role is usually pretty fresh, and what a hiring manager's perspective is and what's important to the position, and will highlight for you probably the most important elements of the entire job description. So if you're going to pay attention to anything or look for something to really weed through the rest of the information in the job description, I personally find that so valuable and have always tried to give a glimpse into the role with that summary.
Yeah, and I know personally we've tried at times to also do a glimpse into the team a little bit more, who you're going to be working
Hmm.
with. Like,
Yep.
this is the chance to get you a little more excited before you then get to some of the other bullets. Because even if we've done a great job writing a job description that doesn't look like everyone else's, at the end of the day, parts of it still will. So, at least for the companies I've worked for, that sort of about the team or about the role piece will hopefully get you more excited about this is the stuff you're going to do, the people you're going to work with, the impact you're going to have. Oh, and here are the bullet points as well.
Yep, and that's a sign of a good job description when they go into those elements and they start to try and paint that picture for you, and you can tell, sort of the love that's gone into the job description and how much importance they're putting into finding the right person for this. And you mentioned earlier that job descriptions are really advertisements for the positions, and that's the biggest indicator, right there, or can be, as they start to talk about those things that might be enticing to the right candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, then we get to the dreaded bullet points.
Yeah.
So, by the way, talking about the style and the tone of the job description and how that reflects the culture, if it says responsibilities versus things that you'll do or what you'll be working on, again, neither is right or wrong, but again, it kind of starts to talk about potentially the culture of the company. I personally think it's kind of neat when companies do things like this is what you'll be working on, or this is who we are versus this is who you are, just something other than responsibilities and background.
It gets to that tone of like casual versus super formal, and it gives you a little bit of insight into that culture. And I do the same thing. I love having creative ways of saying that, so it's not, so it's appealing to look at, and it's almost like inviting someone into of like, hey, if you're gonna come, and work in this position, this is how we're looking at it, and this is what you'll get to do in the role.
So, with that, there are often a lot of bullet
Yes.
points under that. You and I have both written job descriptions where we've tried to tone it, tried to cut things out, and hiring managers are like, "Oh, but what about this? Oh, what about this?" And then you have, other ad hoc projects as needed at the bottom. If I'm a candidate, how do I figure out all of the things it's asking of me and if I should even bother applying?
What you can do is, number one, go back to that job summary and start to look at what they highlighted in that, and what responsibilities and qualifications they're highlighting down below. What connects back to that is
Mm.
always a pretty good indicator of, what some of the more important things might be within those lists. But really looking at responsibilities of the role and requirements of the role, those two differentiated categories. Requirements are going to be, sort of the non-negotiable things that they're listing out that they feel is important in order to set somebody up for success that's
Mm.
coming into the position. So, a lot of times those things will be a little negotiable, but the reason they're setting that bar with requirements is giving you that indication of like, hey, we really feel like to get you in a good place, or for someone to hit the ground running in this role, you're going to need these elements. And then, walking through like a what you will do is really, again, kind of painting the picture. And I think the most important thing is going back to that job summary, tying into, what they highlighted in that part is probably going to be the most important elements to look at in that piece of the job description.
Well, and I think too, anytime, taking all of this out of it, just as a human, if you write a to-do list, the things that are at the top are probably the things that are most top of mind for you, or the things
Certainly.
that, you're most worried about or most important or whatever. I tend to find when hiring managers write job descriptions, it's similar. So the top, whatever, 3, 4 bullets are probably the majority of the work or the most important things or the things they care about most. Everything else, To be frank, sometimes people just put them in there because they don't want a candidate to say, well, I didn't know this was going to be part of the job. And so they're trying to like over communicate or cover their own butts.
Yeah.
But really, it's those first, 3, 4, 5, whatever the right number is. And I'd focus on those. As long as you want to do those and can do those, apply for the job. Don't worry about if you're checking every single box.
Yeah, 1,000%. Job descriptions can also be a little bit of a wish list too. And I think to your point, as you kind of get further and further down, they may not say this, it may not say would be great for this person to have. They may just list it as a requirement, but really in their mind, it's getting into territory of like, hey, this perfect candidate that probably doesn't exist would also have these elements too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that strategy of top of mind is usually top of job description.
And you bring up a good point too about sort of like this unicorn person that doesn't exist, because we all know this person does not exist. Otherwise, you and I would never fill any roles. But there's also this piece around, like under the requirement section, there's the bonus piece of like bonus if you have experience doing blah, blah, blah. That's really the purple squirrel category.
Yeah.
Like you definitely do not have to have that.
The one thing I would say about that is if you don't have it, don't let it impact, how you feel or your strategy moving forward about applying to it. But what it does do, it does give you a little bit of insight is if that element, if you have that piece, highlight it in your cover letter or in some way on your resume, bring it to the top of when you're applying. So there's ways to leverage those things, but certainly don't let it impact whether or not you're going to apply for the position.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about this in, I think it's 2 episodes from now, sort of doing a Mythbuster episode of all the resume and cover letter and like all that kind of stuff and what keywords mean and all that.
Yep.
But when you hear people reference keywords, it's some of those things that are coming out of this job description that are most important to the recruiter or the hiring manager. And to your point, exactly, adding that into your resume and cover letter so they are talking the same language.
Yep, exactly. You want to sort of give the recruiter the answers to the test, and that'll be one of the biggest things is like if you think about it, they're going back to the hiring manager and saying, I found this great candidate and this is why. So anything that you can leverage, and again, not to get too far in the weeds, we'll talk about it in another episode, but great things to pay attention to and leverage for yourself.
Now, you brought up a great point, and I know you and I have talked about this before. It's definitely something that there's been lots of research and articles and all the things written about, but we just said you don't have to check all the boxes to apply, especially for women and people of color. They tend to over analyze and not apply to things. And I should have looked up the exact statistics, but something like 70%. Do you know exactly what it is?
I think it's 60%.
Okay.
Are you getting into like the white males will apply?
Yeah, they only have 60%
white males will
or
apply if they have 60%, and then women and people of color will apply, if they're as close as 100% as they can get.
Yes. Yeah. So when you think about that piece of it, if like a white man's like, I got 60%, that's fine. And everybody else is sort of like over analyzing it. First of all, you're limiting yourself. Like you should absolutely apply. Now, look, if you are 2 years out of school, a VP role is probably far outside your reach. So that's not what we're saying, but we're saying let the recruiter and hiring manager make the decisions. Don't decide for them and sort of opt out before you've even given yourself a chance.
Yep. I mean, look, a job description is you can sort of suss out what those minimum requirements are. And I'd say if you're really excited about a company and you hit that bar or pretty close to it, you'd be doing yourself a disservice not to apply to it. And again, let the recruiter and the hiring manager make that call. And another valuable point is diversity is so important to companies, and it's something that they're looking to expand within their organizations. It's lives within the recruiting process. It lives with every hiring manager. And they can be flexible around certain requirements, wanting to bring in a diverse group of people into the process and into hiring. So, with those two things in mind, I'd say look at where you stand within the minimum requirements and make the decision from there.
The talking about the way a company talks about things, I would also call that out about sort of the diversity line at the end of a job description. So if it's sort of copy and paste EEOC language around no matter your race, gender, color, blah, 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 please apply. And it's like the same thing you've seen off a government website that may say something about what they are trying to include in their diversity initiatives. But if it's more descriptive or more, I've even seen companies write, we are very open to people with different experiences. We want sort of different points of view on this team. So even if you don't have this exact background, please still consider applying. And to me, that's really kind of going above and beyond and saying, we want diversity of thought. We want diversity of backgrounds and experiences. Yes, if you don't know Excel and you're, going to be an analyst, maybe that doesn't make sense, but like
Right.
really think outside the box. And to me, that language is just as telling as some of the other stuff we've talked about.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. I mean, the companies that take the time to intentionally use some of that language and go beyond sort of the minimum guidelines for posting a job legally, that's a huge indicator of like what's important to them, what's important to the team, and again, it's a definitely another window into the culture of the company. It can be a huge positive green flag within a job description.
Yeah, and I think we're going to start seeing the same thing. So depending on when you're listening to this, it's the first week of November when we're recording this. And in New York State, or any job that's based in New York or could be based in New York in this remote world, you now have to include some sort of salary requirement. And I've also started to see companies take some liberties there around how do we want to talk about that piece? Is it just the minimum salary for this role is X? Or is it, we believe in equality, we believe in so therefore the base salary will be this, but we're going to consider all these things. So I'm starting to see that language be another place that I think companies will sort of either lean in and talk about this more or just do the bare minimum.
Yep, definitely a huge indicator of sort of their ethos and where the idea sits with them, and how much their importance is laying within that piece of it. So all things to definitely sort of take into account, and kind of turning that around. It also, if a company doesn't do that, it's an opportunity for a question if you do get an interview of like how they actually do feel about diversity, or other elements that might be missing from the job description or not described in a way that completely aligns with maybe what you're looking for.
Well, and I think too, it goes back to it may not be right or wrong. It's just different. So,
Hmm.
especially coming from, you and I both tend to work in tech startup-y kind of companies. So, we also tend to be in smaller companies. So, we can take the time with some of these job descriptions to really customize and personalize them. If you're at, a huge bank that's got 20,000 people and this is the 500th role that you're posting that day, or you have certain compliance laws because you work for the government or
Right.
whatever thing
Yep.
like that, you may not have the option to change some of that. So it may not be a red flag and a negative, but if you're looking for the culture of tech startup land and you're applying to a government job, that culture is going to be different. It's not right or wrong, it's just different.
Anything that we indicate could be a red flag or bring up in this conversation should generally never be something that makes or breaks your decision whether you're going to apply. I think, again, to what I was saying before, it's just opens the door for a question and an area that you might want to probe a little bit into for yourself, because when you get to the interview process, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And it's really like things to take note of, and maybe areas to kind of dig in with a recruiter or the hiring manager or someone else on the team that you'll get to have a conversation with.
Yeah, it's almost like what we talked about in the last episode, where if you're on Glassdoor and you see some negative reviews, it may not mean don't apply to that because it's the worst company ever. It may just be like those are things you want to ask about in your interview.
Yep.
So even though we just said there's no like red or green flags in a negative or positive way, what are some things that people should look for that we haven't talked about that might be quote unquote green flags?
Certainly the way that they're talking about culture, and if that's any indication, one big thing for me is, personally coming from sort of tech startup worlds, is if the company has a mission and they're super focused around that, and it's something that aligns with you and what you're looking for, can be something that's really fantastic to be able to pull out of a job description, and can be a big green flag of what they find important and what their sort of North Star is, I guess I would say.
Yeah. I would say it's similar about company values. So whether it's on the
Mhm.
job description or on the career page, more as like a whole page, I always suggest to people who are looking for something that is a little more collaborative or mission driven or something that kind of ties to those kind of values. Where is that on their careers page? Where do they talk about what their company values are and how they demonstrate them? Because that might give you more of an inkling to, do they actually live them or are they just words on a wall somewhere?
On that note, like within a job description, it's great to see them call out things like work-life balance and
Mhm.
giving you a little bit of window into are those things that they find important. And again, I think a green flag is always going to have to coincide with sort of what you've decided. Your search is based around and what's important for you, but big elements there that can definitely impact how you act or how you proceed in the actual process.
And I think what you just said is really important. It's a green flag to you. It may not
Mhm.
be a green flag to someone else, and that's okay. But, even something as basic around the logistics of remote, hybrid, in office, you may be looking for something in particular. And so you're excited when they talk about the remote culture and how they're helping keep the teams together. But other people are wanting to go back to the office, at least in a hybrid model. So they might say, oh, only remote first. Okay. I'll have to think about this a little bit more. So it
Yeah.
really is, it goes back to what we talked about earlier in the season that sort of kicked us all off is it's important to know what's important to you. It's important to know what's important to you. And it's important to know what you're going to value and what you are looking for in this next opportunity, because those are the things that you're then going to be looking for in these job descriptions.
Yep, absolutely. And another one that I'm just thinking of is you can get sometimes you can get some indications of the health of the company of how they talk about their growth, and that might be in the beginning of the about the company, or it might be in the summary of the job of like why this position is open. Sometimes they'll
Mhm.
give you some insight into like, hey, we're building out this new team and this is a new position, and that's a great indicator for a number one where the company is and sort of how they're growing, but also gives you a little bit of insight into maybe what the ownership of responsibilities will be coming into the position, and growth can be something that they bring up that's specific to the job. Like maybe they're talking about it. It's again, it's another culture piece, but do they talk about growth of people internally within the company, and that's a great
Mhm.
indicator of somewhere that you might want to go and be able to grow your career, but also how what the opportunity would be is if you're coming in as a manager, how they look at the people that are directly reporting into you, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, even what words they use in those bullets. So do they say things like create or do they say execute?
Hmm.
And, just that might indicate, oh, you're creating something from scratch, or you're empowered to think through these things versus someone gives you a plan and you have to go do it. Again,
Hmm.
neither right or wrong, it depends on what you're looking for. But even those words, like pull up the old thesaurus, like see what words they're using to describe the work that you're going to be doing.
I know we're going to talk a little bit about navigating levels of a
Mhm.
position and how you decide whether or not you're qualified for a certain position based on where you're coming from. But to that point is the language of what does it sound like the actual ownership of this position is? Are you building a strategy or are you implementing a
Mhm.
strategy? Things like that can give you some really good indication into the role and the level of it and the responsibilities.
Yeah, and I think the final thing that you may wanna look for from, like, a green flag standpoint, again, if it's important to you, is the impact of the role, and so I
Yep.
feel like, especially over the last few years when so many things in life and outside of work have been turned upside down, people have been more focused on, "If I'm spending all this time at work, I wanna love what I do, I wanna know I'm making an impact, it's, like, worth the time that I'm, quote, unquote, "giving up to do it." So if you're one of those people looking for how does it describe the impact you have, the team you're working with, those like intrinsic things that are going to help motivate you.
And if it doesn't, that should raise a flag in your head of like as you're going through that and you're applying, like um, this might be an area that I want to probe in a little bit if I get to talk to somebody because this is important to me. It's not being surfaced in the job description, so maybe an area to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. And so before we talk about like titles and levels, because that's another thing you have to sort of translate in these job descriptions,
Yep.
are there any sort of red flags? Again, it's so dependent on the person, but like for me, jargon, I can't stand
Mhm.
jargon or like a million acronyms, either that says, okay, clearly I'm not right for this job because I don't know what any of these acronyms are. Or it's sort of like this insider talk that I feel like is sort of a barrier. But again, that's a very personal thing. But that kind of jargon, we work hard and play hard, like that kind of stuff
Right.
I can't stand.
Yeah, no, totally. But I think, you can that's an indicator of, does that mean there's no work-life balance?
Yeah.
So, that definitely could be a red flag there. Something that can be taken either way is if you see must be very comfortable working independently, or the word independent is surfaced in the job description several different times. Is that an indicator that there's no resources for this position,
Mm,
or there's not a team built around you, or you're not going to have the opportunity to have a close relationship with a manager that will work with you and grow through. So that independent piece is, I'm looking to be independent in any job that I ever go to, and hope that someone will allow me that freedom. But also, you can question it as far as like, what is the investment back from the company, and what is that telling me? So
yeah.
again, a little bit of a red flag, or can just be a flag to ask that question.
Yeah, that's a good one. I was just talking to someone who is a team of one. And so, they chose it for a reason. They're building out the team, all the things. But that means when they jokingly said, the job description said, you will be in the weeds and helping us figure out some of this stuff out,
Mm,
which is meant to be exciting because you get to build from scratch. But
sure.
she was like, I am in the weeds. I am literally like data entering stuff to like
Mm,
figure to get this done.
yeah.
So again, to your point, words that can mean one thing, but can also be an extreme of something, and just ask about it. It just means you may want to ask about it.
Yep, totally. And other things to be wary of is, we've already sort of talked about, there can be a laundry list of requirements and things that you will do. And if it starts to get into the territory of them sounding like they're describing a team, not an
Yeah.
individual, it may raise the flag of, number one, do they know what they really want? Is this person going to be set up for success in this position?
Yeah.
Is there sort of too much for one role, and are they conscious of that? And
Yeah.
or it may just be an indicator they don't know exactly what they want, but something to keep an eye on, like that role may change or may not be exactly what you interview
Mhm.
for when you actually get in the weeds.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think too, the other way I've seen sort of newer roles be described, or roles that, to your point, have a real strong breadth, and it kind of depends on the time of year or whatever, is, dealing with ambiguity, or willing
Mhm.
to, shift quickly or start projects without all the information. And
Yep.
those are more interview questions, but like versions of that in a job description may kind of come through too.
Yep, definitely. And, that can just be an indicator of the stage of the company and where they're at, or the stage of the team, or something new that they're building. So all these things, take them with a grain of salt, help let them inform the questions that you ask, but certainly could be an indicator of like, it's a little crazy here,
Yeah.
and we need somebody to sort of helm it and figure
Yeah.
out, what the role is, or what if this person does need a team underneath them, what that looks like, and if the opportunity is to hire, there
Yes.
to be able to hire a team, those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the final thing I'll call out from a red flag, and again, it's more about what's important to you, is whether in the job description or on their career page, if it doesn't list a benefit you care about. Again,
Mhm.
just like kind of jot that down and make sure you ask about it. But if, family leave is something that's really important to you and you don't see it mentioned anywhere, like kind of look for that somewhere, be ready to ask about it. Or, other things that may or may not be important to you, but just that's another thing that somewhere on a career page, if not in the job description, it should be listing out at least their top benefits.
Yep.
So you alluded to it earlier. So as we wrap up, the other piece of job descriptions is, which we sort of glossed over at the very beginning, is the actual title of the job,
Oh,
and how
yes.
to think about, oh yeah, that thing you're applying to. How do you think about how that relates to where you are today? Is it a step up? How do you understand where it is in the organization? Different organizations call things different, or I think it's banks are like inverse and actually a director is more senior than a VP. So
Mm.
how do you sort of think about, will this be a lateral move or a step up for me?
Yeah, that can be tough. And like to your point, the definition or the level of a certain position can mean 1,000 different things in different companies. So I think number one, the language that they're using, indicating sort of what ownership throughout the job description this person will give you a pretty good indication of what you'll come in and actually own and be responsible for, and does that line up with sort of what you're coming out of, and also what you're looking to grow into. Some low hanging fruit can be the actual minimum years of requirement that they're listing in the job description. Again, like if you're within a year or two, I don't think it completely puts you out of the picture, but it, again, to the level perspective, it gives you an indication of what their expectation of someone coming in is bringing to the table in this position. And even further than that, with specific responsibilities, it can list must have 2 years of experience with this,
Mm.
and those will be insightful as far as maybe amount of experience someone is bringing to the table within the position.
Well, and I think too, sometimes companies will post it a little lower than maybe they're willing to bring someone in because they don't want to promise a higher title if they're
Mm,
willing to be a little flexible. So, for example, I've had roles that were director level roles, but we posted as senior manager or like head of, with
yep.
the ability to be flexible. And if it's someone who was brand new to our industry, we brought him in as a senior manager so they could learn about the industry, and then they'd have a quick path to director. And we would talk about that in the interview process and all the things.
Yep.
So with someone I'm actually talking to right now, I was suggesting, spread the wings a little bit more in the beginning, learn about the role and the opportunity. And then if it's too junior for you, or if it's too senior, they probably won't talk to you. But if it's too junior for you, it's okay to say like, hey, I'm actually looking for something a little more senior, or would you be flexible to considering a director level role, or director level person for this role? So again, sometimes it's worth at least applying or starting the conversation, learning more about it. It could also be that they don't have a lot of directors, and that's like a huge step for them at that organization. On the flip side, if you want to do a little LinkedIn sleuthing, you can see if you're applying for if you think you are a director of sales and you're up see a senior manager of sales, is there a director of sales at that company currently? And if not, it may be they're bringing someone in and looking to promote. So you can kind of do a
Yep.
little sleuthing too.
No, that's a great point. And you can look at the team and look at their backgrounds and
Mhm.
how many years of experience they have and what level they're at. There's a lot of information you can get from just sort of dissecting some of the information that's available to you on LinkedIn. So I love that strategy.
Yeah, and even though I kept using the senior manager to director, I think it's more appropriate for like manager to senior manager as an example, or like whatever, analyst and senior analyst. A lot of times people will bring people in at the non-senior level because they want to promote you from within and bring you to that next level. So if you're a manager currently or an analyst or whatever, and it's a lateral move, it may be because they only promote to seniors versus hiring seniors from outside.
Yep.
Impossible.
Yep, totally. And I think it goes back to the piece of like what you're really looking for, and
Mhm.
how much the company and maybe their product, their brand, their mission resonates with you. Because depending on the size of the company, they might be leveling positions differently, but you might have a different amount of responsibility or ownership with a lesser title. And is that okay with you? So those are okay things to navigate in your first couple conversations. I think the point is like, do things sort of minimally line up for you, and like let's get to a conversation with a recruiter or a hiring manager or someone, and it's totally okay to surface these questions in the beginning of these conversations, so nobody's wasting anybody's time.
Yeah.
It's appreciated on all sides.
Yeah. And I mean, compensation will come up, and maybe it's more about staying level compensation wise versus title wise, or maybe it's actually the opposite for you. Yeah, I think the biggest key to all of this is, well, you don't want to waste people's time, and it takes time to apply and it takes time to review. If you're semi close, apply, and then you'll figure out, you'll have the conversations and you get all the things from there, because you get to opt out at any point. Just because you're asked for an interview, if the conversation isn't really what you wanted it to be, then that's okay. You could say thanks, but no thanks. Please consider me for something else in the future. Like, you
Yep.
have that control. So go ahead and apply for it.
Yep. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with that more.
Well, and it's funny because all of this ties into, literally, our next episode is actually called "It's Not About What You Know, It's About Who You Know." And that we're going to talk about, yes, you can apply, but it's actually about all the relationship building and finding out about jobs through people and having exploratory conversations.
Yep.
And that's a great place to have all of these questions asked before you even start to interview even. So this is going to tie in perfectly to next week's episode.
Love it.
But before we wrap today, we always walk away with like one thing you should do differently, or one thing you can try differently in your job search. So if we have someone who is listening to this episode and saying like, okay, so tomorrow when I look at these job descriptions, what should I be thinking about differently? What's one thing that you would recommend to them?
I love the job summary piece of the job description. I think there's so much valuable information. As I said earlier, it's kind of the thesis statement of it. So of the entire job description. So really pay attention to that and start dissecting what type of information you can get from not just the role, but the company, about the culture, about the team, maybe some of the resources that will be available. And I'd say just kind of put your finger on the pulse of the company through some of those statements. And it'll be helpful as you sort of read through the rest of the job description, and also tying those pieces into the requirements and the qualifications that they're listing out, like what's important for the role.
I love that. And I think for me, it is just don't opt out, let them make some of those decisions. So if it
Yeah.
looks of interest to you, if it speaks to you about what you want to do next, if you at least can check some of the boxes, just go ahead and apply. They will tell you if you are not qualified. Let them make those decisions. Don't do it for them. So apply to it all, because you're probably more qualified than you're giving yourself credit for.
Love it.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. These episodes I personally think are great because you're getting lots of different perspectives, and you're hearing, as Dan's been doing this for years as a recruiter and now working with some of our clients on how to navigate these job searches. I've been on the HR side, and I'm working with folks on how to navigate the job search. So hopefully these episodes are really helpful and really getting in the weeds to help you figure these things out. So thank you as always, my friend, for joining.
Thank you. I will see you next time.
Sounds good. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Shine at Work podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. Leaving a review just takes a few minutes and truly helps other people find this podcast, which is why we do this podcast, to help others. If you want to learn more about how we work with people to help them transform their careers and shine brightly in their lives, let's connect. We work with amazing humans one-on-one to help make a career change, go for that promotion, set career goals, and just build a plan for success for a job. Whether you're newer in the workforce, coming back after a break to focus on family, you've been in your job or your career for years, or maybe you're taking a step into management, we can help you. You can email me directly at Karen@KarenDweeks.com, or message me on Instagram at KDWCoaching_careers, or find me on LinkedIn, just Karen D. Weeks. Finally, we always have to give a shout out to the amazing Astronaut Go Home for our music, and the people I don't know how it would live without, Novice Studios, for making the podcast come to life. Until next time, remember that you can and deserve to shine at work.